I want to welcome you back to another session of Growing Kids God's Way. Tonight we're going to continue with our study in discipline, and discipline encouragement will be the central theme of our conversation tonight. I want to remind you that last week we started our study by looking at the standard. The standard, what is required. We talked about first-time obedience. We talked about a child coming to first-time obedience, coming the first time you call the child, add a yes, mommy to it. In the tail end of your study notes, in your reading assignment, we talked about the 4 levels of initiative. I want to draw your attention to that, because when we look at the standard of behavior, when we talk about first-time obedience with your children, that's something you're going to train your child to. We want them to respond to us the first time we call with a happy heart, with a happy spirit. That's not idealism. That's something that you can really do. But you want to go beyond that. And again, let me give you this warning. This is where many growing kids, God's way people end up getting themselves in trouble. You bring your child to first-time obedience. You find that to work very well, and you never transition the child. Now, I've said this before to you. You must transition the child from wanting to obey you out of any fear of consequence to doing right simply because it's right. Now, the 4 levels of initiative that we talked about, the highest level is the self-generated initiative. This is truly where you want to get your child to. There's a piece of paper on the floor, and you say, honey, would you pick that up, please, for mommy? You're giving them an instruction. And, of course, they bend down, they pick it up, and they do it. And they may do it with a happy heart. First level of initiative, self-generated initiative, is when you don't say anything. And the child sees the piece of paper on the floor, and the child picks it up simply because it's there. That's what we call self-generated initiative. That's where you want to end up. Now, prompted initiative is the level 2, as you read through that. Prompted initiative is also very good. That's when the child receives instruction and does what is right. They do it with the right attitude. They do it completely. They do it immediately. It's not first level, but it's very good. You certainly want to be at that level. The 3rd level of initiative is forced initiative, and that's when you give your child instructions. They will do it on the outside, but they will not do it on the inside. They do it, there's the murmuring, the complaining. So if your child's at that point now, what you want to do is to move them to the 2nd level, the prompted level of initiative. And then finally, we moved and we talked about suppressed initiative. This is the lowest. This is when through parental action, the child's initiative is totally suppressed. Please go upstairs and put away your clothes, and I want you to make your bed. And so the child goes upstairs, and a half hour later, mommy goes up. The child is playing with his train set. So mommy throws up her hands and says, oh, what am I going to do with you? And she does it all. The very fact that mommy does it all, that's what's suppressing the initiative. That's why the child doesn't do anything, because he knows mom has a bailout strategy. She will come, and she will do it. So I want to bring you back to that, those 4 levels of initiative, especially self-generated, because yes, you're going to work towards first-time obedience, but beyond that, folks, you must come to the self-generated initiative that really comes from a heart that understands, sensitive to his environment, who's willing to do right. Even if no one else is around, I will pick up the piece of paper because it's there. That's what you want. Now, we also mentioned last week that instruction is really the core of biblical discipline. You want to instruct your children. You're going to instruct them certainly verbally. You're going to instruct them by your example. But surrounding instruction are various elements of training, including affirmation, goal incentives, the proper use of rewards, natural consequences, related consequences, the use of isolation, chastisement. You see, there's a proper time and a proper place for all of those discipline elements. They fit somewhere in a period of time. Certain ones, such as encouragement and affirmation, will be used throughout the training process. Other elements of the cores and activities of biblical discipline will be used primarily in the early years. There will be some that will be used more sparingly in the middle years, and some that won't be used at all in the later years. So there's a time and a place for each one of those special activities. Now, in addition to what we've already listed, there are ancillary concepts to discuss yet in the discipline portion. What about repentance? What about forgiveness? What about restoration? What is the rod of reproof? And under what conditions should a child be spanked, if a child should be spanked at all? What is rebellion, and why do children lie? Why do children whine? I know some of you want us to get to that real quick. What about temper tantrums? And what's the difference between a temper tantrum and a frustration tantrum? What is the difference in response between mom and dad as it relates to those two? Now, these are just some of the concepts, some of the questions that are going to be answered as we explore the parameters of biblical discipline. But our journey begins with the discipline chart, the chart that you should have right in front of you. We're going to use this chart to help guide us through the next several sessions. And I want to move very slowly on this chart. Folks, listen, please. I would rather have you bored than confused, especially in this area. We need to take our time. We need to make sure you understand how all of these elements fit together, lest you become confused and the child is the one who ends up losing out. I also want to remind you to make sure you do your homework. Do your homework, especially in these sessions. We do them in all the sessions, but especially in this portion of Growing Kids God's Way, because this area of discipline is usually the most misunderstood. It's confusing to many parents. And so that's why the homework's going to help, and listening very carefully and working with us as we systematically move through this chart. In fact, why don't you go ahead and put the chart in front of you if you don't have it there already. And let's just look at it. If you look at the chart in front of you, it can look overwhelming. Now listen, by the time we're done in the next several weeks, it is really our belief that you can master this chart. You will understand the entire flow. You will understand how everything relates. You will understand how to make the right decision, how to make the right assessment. So although the chart may look complex, in fact, you will become the masters over this chart. And I think you're going to find this chart to be of tremendous help to you. Hopefully this chart may find a place initially up on your refrigerator where you put up with some magnets, and if you need to make some decisions on discipline, you can refer back to this chart, and this chart will become a guide. Well, let's get started. You'll see, again, we have listed on the left-hand side instruction. Instruction is the core of biblical discipline. If you do not verbally instruct, how will your children ever know? I mean, that is common sense. If you never tell them, how will they ever know? If you do not live your instructions, how much can it really mean? If you do not live your moral standard, does it have any significance in mommy and daddy's life? That is the question that's often asked by the children. So there's teaching and there's example, and both of them are needed. Instruction is the core. If you need to review the appendix in which we talked about this, do that. But we start with instruction. That is the core of biblical discipline. Now, the first two things that we need to do is to separate a child's moral behavior from his morally neutral behavior or from his non-moral behavior. Not all behavior is moral. Some behavior is just basic skill-oriented. In fact, if you go to box S1, it'll be up on the top there. Box S1, please write these words in. Skills/talents. Skills and talents. In box S1, write in the word, please, skills and talents. Skills and talents. And then just below that, you'll see B1. Box B1 coming off of instruction. Write in the word behavior. Behavior. Now this will start our division. This is where we're going to begin. We want to distinguish when working with a child, are we talking about behavior or are we talking about the activities surrounding skills, talents, giftedness? What exactly are we talking about? Again, not all activities are tied to moral behavior. Now, when we talk about basic skills, let's look at S1. Okay? S1. When we talk about basic skills, what are these? Well, learning to ride a bicycle. That's not moral. Learning to swim. That's not moral. Learning to kick a ball. Learning to play the piano. Memorizing your multiplication table. See, all of those things, they're not moral. They're skills, they're talents. But they're not moral activities. They represent the development of the natural gifts, the natural talents, and the physical and mental attributes. So in box 1, we've written skills and talents. In box B1, we have written down behavior. We put that in there. And let me also footnote this. When we talk about behavior again, behavior is related to the duties of the heart. So when you separate out skills and talents and anything that we deal with in terms of motivating skills and talents and the development of them, We are not talking about the duties of the heart. All right? Well, let's continue on a little bit further. And we're going to focus up on the top, on skills and talents. Let's take a look at this. It says skills and talents. We're going to encourage skills and talents. We're going to encourage them. We're going to strengthen them. Now, there are two predominant ways to do this. Two ways to encourage a skill, a talent, a gift that the child may have. Number one is obviously verbal praise. If you would write that in box 2, S2. S2, write in verbal praise. Verbal praise. Great job, Ryan. You can see how much your practice last week has helped you. I mean, it's just so noticeable. That's verbal praise. Jennifer, I'm listening to you play the piano, and I can hear how much you have improved over last week with just adding that 5 minutes to your practice time. It sounds wonderful. You know, verbal praise from mommy and daddy within the context of a relationship means so much to the child. Hearing you talk about it, that's verbal praise. And also, jot in, if you have a spot to put it in, praise should mean something. It should relate to a cause and effect. Praise should relate to a cause and effect. Simply saying to your child, "Oh, you're so cute." That's not praise. That may be a compliment. That's not praise. When we talk about praising a child in developing a skill, in developing a talent, we're talking about a cause and effect. In the scenario we gave you, we said, Ryan, you can see how much your practice has helped you. You're doing so well. The practice that Ryan put into his efforts last week, the additional practice, is showing up this week. You see, there's a cause and effect. And the parent is pointing out that cause and effect. Jennifer, the 5 minutes more you added to your practice of practicing playing the piano, that has changed everything. You see, there's a cause and effect. So the praise means something to the child. It's linked there. Now also, we want to add this caution. Do not praise on cue. Do not praise on cue. What do we mean by on cue? Well, you're at the child's ball game. And of course, at the end of the ball game, you're supposed to say, because you're the mommy and daddy, "Hey, great game." That's praising on cue. There's nothing wrong with that. But you want to praise. The most effective praise is when the child does not expect it. You see, I expect my dad, because I have such a great relationship with him, that when I step off the field, what I commonly hear is my dad saying, "Hey, you played a great game tonight." Well, that's wonderful. I appreciate that. But you know what I appreciate more? Is when I receive praise and I'm not expecting it. When that little girl comes up and says, Mommy, do you see what I colored for you? And you say, "Oh, that is so wonderful. Look how well you stayed in the circles." Well, you know, if your daughter's coloring or your son is coloring and you go up to them and say, "Wow, you're doing so well staying in the circles with your colors." That praise motivates them. It means more at that point. See, it's not a praise that's just simply on cue. The most effective praise, motivating a skill, comes when a child is not expecting it. Not expecting it. So praise, verbal praise. That's how do you motivate them? Verbal praise. Now, there's another way. There's the second way that you motivate a skill, a talent, a natural ability, and that's through goal incentives, S3. Please, in box S3, write in the word goal incentives. Goal incentives. Goal incentives. Now, what is this? Goal incentives are used to encourage a skill, to encourage a talent. It's used for motivating non-moral behavior. For example, when we were living on a lake and we wanted Amy to be water safe, at 4 years old, we said to her early in the summer, "If you learn to swim from Grandpa's dock over to Mommy and Daddy's dock, we'll go out and we'll buy you that special treat. We'll go out and buy you that snorkeling kit that you saw in the store that you really wanted. But you must learn to swim first before you could use the snorkeling kit." And you know, Amy worked all summer, and as a little girl, she learned to swim by herself from Grandpa's dock over. We motivated her with a goal incentive. There was this incentive, something she wanted that added meaning to her learning, that encouraged her to learn. Now, folks, pay close attention to this. I have to emphasize this. Goal incentives are only used for development of skills and talents. never used and never associated with behavior. They are never associated with behavior. They're only associated with non-behavior, morally neutral. Say non-behavior, non-moral behavior, morally neutral activities. Now, why can't they be associated with behavior? Because of the moment you do that, it's a bribe. Therein lies the difference. When you say to your child, Johnny, if you're good in the store, Mommy will buy you a candy at the end, some parents think, oh, I'm using a goal incentive. No, that is not a goal incentive. That is a bribe. Because in fact, what you're saying is, I will give you candy, you give me good behavior. I will give you something that appeals to the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. But in exchange, you have to give me orderly behavior. That is not a goal incentive. That is a bribe. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later on. Let me say that the corresponding motivation on the behavior side of this chart is a reward. It's not a bribe. It's a reward. And I will teach you how to reward your children and how to avoid bribing your children. But back to goal incentives. Goal incentives are great. We're developing skills. We're developing talents. Maybe there's a child who is struggling right there at the C mark on his report card. And his dad says, son, if you get your C up to a B on this semester, if you work real hard to get it up there, Dad's going to take a day off from work and we're going to go out for some spring fishing. You and I, we'll do it. The goal incentive, the goal to do it is the fishing. Now there's a reason the child is motivated to work harder. It has nothing to do with behavior. It has to do with the discipline. It has to do with self-control. It has to do with working harder to memorize the facts that I need to improve my grade. That's a goal incentive. In contrast, you get a note home from school. The teacher says, your son has been getting out of his chair, speaking out of turn, and pushing other children. So you say to your son, well, son, if you're good for 2 weeks, if you don't get out of your chair, if you don't push any other children, if you don't speak out of turn, Daddy will take a day off and we'll go fishing. That is not a goal incentive. That is a what? A bribe. Now, why is it a bribe? Because in context, although they're both at school, in context, with the second scenario, it's all behavior related. It has nothing to do with skill, it has nothing to do with talent, it has nothing to do with giftedness, it has nothing to do with natural abilities. It's a behavioral problem in school, so even there you cannot offer the bribe. You can't call it a goal incentive. So be careful with your goal incentives. When you say, well, how do I know when to use a goal incentive? Well, it's easy. You look at, is this a skill, a talent, or is this behavior? If it's behavior, you cannot use goal incentives because they become bribes. So, your child does have behavior. Not all behavior is necessarily moral. Some of it is the development of the talents, and when that happens, you're going to verbally praise the child, and also you're going to use goal incentives. Now let's move down to the other side of the chart. Let's go back to B1, please. B1, you should have written in behavior. B1 has behavior. Now, behavior has two sides to it. There's a positive side and a negative side. When we look at understanding what we need to do to encourage or correct a child, first of all, we have established, well, this is behavior now. We're not dealing with skills and talents. We're dealing with a heart issue, a duty of the heart, or the lack of action from the heart. So it's broken down positively and negatively. In B3, please write in the word correction. Correction. And in B2, below it, in B2, please write in the word encouragement. That is the operative word for this section, encouragement. Behavior needs to be encouraged, something very positive. Also, behavior needs to be corrected. In our next session, we're going to talk about the correction side. Very complex, but not impossible to understand. In this session, we're going to talk about the encouragement side, something that parents really don't do enough of often. Now, encouragement. We're going to encourage behavior. We encourage behavior, E1, up there on top, E1. There's behavior, there's pre-activity encouragement. If you write in the words pre-activity, E1, pre-activity. Pre-activity. What does that mean, pre-activity? That means I am going to encourage my child before the activity, before the action. I'm going to encourage him with, box E2 please, a verbal reminder. I'm going to encourage him with a verbal reminder before there's any action. When I say pre-activity, he's going off to church. Mommy wants to remind him of how he should act on the patio. You see, the activity hasn't taken place. It's a pre-activity. It's encouragement. He hasn't done anything wrong, but you're encouraging him to do right. So E2 is verbal reminder, and if you write in, please, we'll take care of it. E3 is dialogue question. Dialogue question. Fit that into that small spot. Dialogue question, E3. So let me give you a quick summary here. Off of behavior, we know that's positive and negative. We're going to correct bad behavior. We're going to encourage good behavior. From the encouragement side of behavior, we know now that there's a pre-activity. E1 is pre-activity. And if you'd like to, just for clarification, write in box E4, post-activity. See, pre-activity and post-activity. Post-activity is encouraging them because they have done right. Pre-activity is encouraging them before they even get out the door. So post-activity. Let's go back to E2. Let me talk about verbal reminders. How about something simple? Ryan, Mrs. Ezra's coming over for lunch today. I want to remind you to make sure you say hi because that is being courteous and that's being polite, giving the moral reason. Mrs. Ezra's not there. She is not giving instruction to her child. What she's doing is she's verbally reminding the child of what is right and then telling the child what is right. Another example, church patio. Ryan, make sure you stand by my side at the church patio when church is all done. You know, all those people come out with the wheelchairs and some of the older folks come out and then there's the mothers with the babies, so you stand by my side. I don't want you going anywhere. So there's that verbal reminder to do right. Now, the major difference between a verbal reminder and a dialogue question is this. This is very interesting. The verbal reminder, you tell the child. Under the dialogue question, the child tells you. Let me explain how this works. The goal of this method is to get the child to tell you what is required. You're driving down the road, you're going to the grocery store, and you say to the children, okay, who can tell me what are the rules, the rules for the grocery store when we get there? And one little child raises her hand and says, there's no running in the store. That's right. And number two, we're not supposed to stand on the cart. That's right. And the mother may say, Becky, can you add to that? Do you know some more rules? We're not supposed to touch the candy and the nuts. And that's right. That's right. You see, what you're doing in the dialogue question, you're asking them to tell you what are the rules. And you know what is interesting? They hear themselves give you the guidelines. The rules are going to follow in the store. And that is encouraging because even though a little child has a degree of integrity in that once they verbalize what the rules are, once they say it, oftentimes they will not violate it. And then that allows the parent to say, right, with excitement, you're going to offer them praise. This is pre-activity. They have given you the rules. Thank you so much for remembering those rules, those guidelines, whatever it may be. That is the dialogue question. That's what you want to do. And of course, please also jot this down. With the dialogue question, this is something you're going to do with young children. You know, maybe a 2.5 or 3, 3.5, 4, 5-year-old. You're not going to do this with your 10-year-old. You're not saying, okay, kids, you know, the preteens, what are the rules for the grocery store? That's inappropriate. You're going to do that with your younger children. Verbal reminder, you're going to take that through the different stages and the different ages, but not the dialogue question. Not the dialogue question. It is limited. And let me go back to a verbal reminder and talk about how can you discourage older children with reminders. I remember we used to do this. We were always guilty of this. We tried to learn, and I think eventually we did learn. But you know, when we would go out maybe teach a class, the girls were just starting the teen years or they were into their teen years, and we would eat a quick dinner together, and the dishes were there, and we would say to them, girls, would you mind doing the dishes, or would you remember to do the dishes? And you know what we did? Those girls, They did the dishes every single night we were out. And every single time we said, well, don't forget to do the dishes. We robbed them at that moment of their joy. The joy of surprise. The joy of serving us. It got to a point that, don't tell us, because you're taking away our desire to do it, and just having you come home and hearing the praise. Oh, look what these girls did tonight, Anne-Marie. Look at this kitchen. This kitchen is spotless. You know, and every time you do that, you rob the child of the joy of wanting to serve because you're constantly reminding. You say, well, verbal reminders are good. Verbal reminders are very good, especially in the early years, but you know, you could take away from the child's desire to do right simply because you're constantly reminding the child. Don't do that to your children. Let them surprise you by what they have done. Surprise you positively. Okay, so on the pre-activity, we're going to encourage with a verbal reminder, or we're going to encourage with the dialogue question. There are two different ways to encourage a child. Now let's move to the post-activity. E4, we said post-activity, we're going to encourage with rewards and praise. Rewards and praise. That's what we encourage with, rewards and praise. Not a bribe, rewards and praise. Now what is it? We reward behavior. Now rewards are tangible and non-tangible. Rewards are a pack of gum at the checkout counter, or you were so good in the store today, Mommy wants to take you to the park. It can be tangible or non-tangible, something you would do. You go to the store, and instead of saying, Johnny, if you're good in the store today, I'll buy you a candy, the bribe, you don't say anything. Because the relationship and the training is such that that's expected. I mean, that's normal behavior. Of course you expect that. But that's when you get to the checkout counter and you say to the child, because you were so good today, Mommy wants to say thank you by buying a special treat. And you can pick out anything on this rack right here. Just to say thank you. Boy, that means so much because the child is saying, you have noticed my willingness to comply and to be part of this trip to the store without causing any problems. Folks, children should be rewarded for their obedience. Children should be rewarded for their obedience, but they should not be obedient for a reward. Yes, we should reward them for obedience. We want to do that. But once they start being obedient for a reward, you know what you have there? You have a backdoor bribe. It's almost as if, okay, you don't have to say anything about promise me candy, but it's sort of like a silent contract. Look, I'm going to give you good behavior, and every time we go to the store, I deserve something. No, you don't. You don't give your child a reward every single time they go to the store. Because the only thing you're going to do is create what is called reward dependency. A reward dependency. You don't want to do that. Reward dependency, that's a terrible thing. That means a child will only do right when it's something in it for himself. You don't want that. It's like Shamu down at SeaWorld. Why does he jump through the hoop? Well, he jumps through the hoop because there's a bucket of squid at the end if he does that act. That's exactly what happens with your children, with the bribing and with reward dependency. It's as if they go through the acts of behavior. They're jumping through all the hoops you want. They look good on the outside, but on the inside there's nothing. The only reason they're doing it is because they have been conditioned at the end, I'm going to give you something. And that is the wrong reason. You want them doing right out of the love of virtue. We want to reward the behavior. We want to motivate the behavior. We want to encourage that behavior. But I'll tell you, folks, if you park there, ultimately what you do is you undo everything for the child. You don't want to. Sometimes you're going to get the checkout counter. They're going to say, well, Mommy, are you going to buy me anything? No, not today. But I'm going to give you a great big hug because physical affirmation is also important to a child. Some children would rather have the candy or the gum or whatever, but you know physical affirmation. So don't buy them something every single time you're at the checkout counter as if you owe it to them. Folks, you don't owe it to them. Not from a biblical ethical model. You don't owe it to them. Not at all. You know what I want to bring up, and I want to maybe summarize even this portion, is this issue of encouragement. Anne-Marie and I have found traditionally in the Judeo-Christian culture, and certainly within the Christian church, we are very, very quick to correct. I said this from lesson 1. Young parents are more preoccupied with suppressing evil than they are elevating good. Well, part of the elevating good is being an encouraging parent. Encouragement, properly done and in the context of a biblical relationship, can be a wonderful motivator to behavior. Seeing mommy and daddy's pleasure, seeing their smiles, seeing their eyes, reading their joy, reading their contentment. What a wonderful motivator of behavior. But for the most part, young Christian parents don't encourage enough. And by the way, I'll qualify that. There are plenty of Christian parents that give second and third and fourth chances. That's not encouragement. That's just poor parenting. That is not grace. That is not a compassion. That is not mercy. That's being a threatening, repeating parent. I mean, you boil it all down. Encouragement is coming alongside the child and maybe just saying those words. I love you. There would be days when I would be sitting at my desk at home, and maybe a child would be studying across the way, and I would just say, Amy, yes, Dad? Nothing. I just want to tell you I love you. I love you too. And that's it. That's the type of encouragement, along with the praise for the activities, along with the responses that should come. I'll tell you this, outside the context of a biblical relationship, encouraging words can be the sound of hypocrisy. And fundamentally, some of the problems we have with our teens currently is the fact that they sense hypocrisy in the parent. They hear the words of encouragement, but there's no meaning. They hear the words of encouragement, but those words of encouragement are from or outside of the context of a biblical relationship. Remember, an encouraging word is not the same thing as an encouraging parent. The comments of a father or even a mother who do not take the time to establish that level 3 relationship, that loyal relationship, that trust relationship. Comments from that type of a father, comments from that type of a mother, those are the comments that sound hypocritical. They want to come maybe publicly and pat you on the back because everyone expects that. Maybe you're in the gymnasium, maybe you're in the track field, and they pat you on the back publicly, but you know at home, hey, I've never heard from you. Encouragement. You need to encourage your children continually to do right. You need to encourage them. You need to be affirming them. You have to remember, every one of us enjoys a pat on the back now and then. We all enjoy hearing well done by someone who has influence over us or even authority over us. We find appreciation in hearing how our actions pleased or helped another person, and it's no different with our children. Our children have the same sensation. They want to know that you really do care. It's more than just, well, you're always there for correction, but you're never there for encouragement. I just want to challenge you as we close down this evening's session, getting ready for our next session, which is going to be very, very comprehensive in terms of the correction side. I don't even want to move into the correction side unless I sense from you that you understand the dynamics of going home, even this evening, and starting right away with this encouragement. Find something. Sit at the dinner table and find something to encourage everyone around the table. We've done this before. Tonight, we're just going to share, what do you enjoy about your sister? And what do you enjoy about your mom? And mom has to say something nice about me, Dad. And I'll say something nice. Make it a family thing. You want to, train your children to encourage one another. This is part of the sibling relationship. Stop training them to fight with one another. Start training them to encourage one another. Make it part of the total reality that's integrated into your family life. I am amazed by how many brothers and sisters don't want to talk to each other even in adulthood. And I can tell you, it comes back to, there's an absence of relationship there. Obviously, there's an absence of relationship. There's the absence of encouragement. And again, my goodness, encouragement may be one simple word, or maybe 3 simple words, and that may be it. In the early years, you young parents are preoccupied with getting things under control. I realize that. There are many more no's in your little person's life than there are yeses. And so you want to get things under control, and rightfully so you want to do that. At the same time, don't get locked into that. You need to be thinking of encouragement. And of course, we all know that because our experience personally has shown and proven to us that the absence of encouragement is discouragement. So don't do that. Don't do that with your own children. Okay, let me just remind you, we've gone through the skills, talent side of the chart. We talked about goal incentives. We compared goal incentives to to rewards. We compared it to a bribe. We moved down to the behavior side of the chart. We said behavior has a corrective side and has an encouragement side. We looked at the encouragement side. We said encouragement, there's pre-activity encouragement, before the child gets there. And then there was post-activity encouragement. In the pre-activity encouragement, we said there's the verbal reminder. Don't be a silent, delayed parent. If there was a parent type that I would pin on that, it would be the silent, delayed parent. Silent, delayed parent is the one who sits back, sees the child potentially getting in trouble, says nothing, does not warn. The child then gets in trouble, and then the delayed action, the parent is right on that child. Why did you do that? You should have had more sense. Why did you play near these little children? See, this little boy's hurt now. The silent, delayed parent is a very discouraging parent. The silent, delayed parent is one who would never intervene and say, son, come on over here. I want to privately give you a warning so that you don't get yourself in trouble. So we have that. We have those reminders. We have the dialogue questions. And then, of course, you come on back down as we conclude this review, and you come to the proper use of rewards. We encourage with rewards. A reward doesn't have to be very big. Not big at all. It could be a pack of gum. Maybe it could be a little bit bigger. Maybe it is a trip to the park. Maybe you're going to make the rewards cumulative. Once you get 5 of these things, then we're going to do something really special. Whatever it may be, rewards. Never use it. Never say, I will give you something, and call it a reward before the action because it's a bribe. And you don't want to be known as a shrewd and devious manager because a bribing parent is a manipulating parent, and a manipulating parent is a shrewd and devious manager. It's a poor way to parent. Don't do it that way. We'll pick up on this when we come back in our next session. Let's go to wrap up right now, and let's talk about these very issues. Take your questions.
Well, this evening we covered part 1 of our charts, and that's what we're going to be working on for the next 2 weeks. And by the time we finish, you will understand them and you will be able to make the application. But for tonight's lesson, we're dealing mainly with encouragement, skills, and achievements. And we want to make sure that you understand that whole issue of skills and achievements and rewards, and don't misapply that whole principle. And we do want to emphasize the issue of encouragement. I think that's probably one area as parents where, unfortunately, we get so focused in on the training of don't do that, and let's do this. And we forget to encourage when they do the right thing. And it's so discouraging for your children because, remember, it does take self-control for them to put the effort into obeying you. And when they obey, yes, we expect it, but we do need to encourage them in that area. Dealing with the whole issue of skills and achievement, and sometimes a question of charts comes into play. Is there a place for charts? I mean, do we ever use it for behavior, or what is the best area really that you've seen practically in other people that we've worked with in the issue of charts?
Well, charts usually work as a reminder or an incentive to reach a goal. We've used charts very rarely in our home, honestly, and we've used it to remind, perhaps for chores, that you have X amount on certain days, and it's just as a reminder to go in and check and look and make sure that you are doing the appropriate thing on the appropriate day. We know several families that have worked as a family goal chart. If they read X amount of pages during the summer, each family member read X amount of pages. At the end, they'd go to Disneyland or something like that. So if it's used for goal incentives, not for behavior, it will really, serve its best purpose.
They're really hard to keep up over the long term, but just to prime the pump, to get things going, they can be pretty effective.
You just mentioned prime to pump. Now, normally we're going to use charts to encourage skills, but how about a new behavior? Would we or could we use a chart legitimately to encourage a new behavior, as you're saying, Eric, to prime the pump?
There is an appropriate place for that. As a matter of fact, I'm just thinking of a situation that I was working with a young mom, and her 4-year-old really needed to gain some areas of self-control. And so she made a chart, put the fruit of the Spirit up above, underlined self-control in that particular area, and that was used as an encouragement. And after a whole week of working on this, maybe there's going to be a little special trip to the dime store or whatever, but And she broke it up into small increments of time. It started on the first day. If he showed self-control for an hour, they just kind of put a little sticker up there, and that encouraged him to say, oh, I got some victory in this. And an hour may not seem like much to some of you, but for some children, an hour's worth of self-control is very good.
What is interesting, I know you guys experience this, there is a silent learning that takes place. If you're working on this with, say, the eldest or one of the older children, the younger one, I know your little Brookie, she's picked up things way in advance of the other three simply because, well, I have three other examples, right?
Exactly. We find that very little has to be said almost to her because she is prompted by the other children plus the example set before us. And it should be a good reminder for us as parents to be the example for our children.
Because they are always watching, for sure they are. Another issue, the difference between a reward and a bribe. And sometimes that can become a little bit confusing in the parents' mind, particularly as they're beginning to change habits, because I think the tendency for many of us is to bribe our children. You know, if you're good in the store today, then you can have some candy, as opposed to after the fact. But even when we're dealing with that whole issue of rewards and bribes and how to balance that all out,
it's a very dangerous trap to get into the habit of always offering something at the end of good behavior, because then your child begins to look, that's the motive for good behavior rather than a heart motive.
So it's a sort of a backdoor bribe?
Yes, it's sort of a backdoor bribe. I guess that's a good way to put it.
It's the silent contract, I guess. We don't have to talk about it before I go in the store. I just know I'm good, you give me candy.
Occasionally it's very good to say, I know we've been at the doctor's, we've been at the pharmacy, we've been a lot of places today. I'd love to buy you a pack of gum. You have really showed good behavior and self-control. I'll do this. But to do it every single time and get into a habit where your child looks for that would be the danger point. Sometimes just a hug and verbally encouraging them should be plenty in a lot of cases. But, that's where variety comes into play. Sometimes we do something, sometimes we get something, and sometimes we just get a hug.
Which is nice in and of itself.
Sure. I think the other thing that I attempted to stress this evening is that a goal incentive is not the same thing as a reward. And parents have to keep in mind, please, rewards are for behavior, goal incentives are for skills, talents, and achievement. That distinction has to be made clear, because many parents cross the line and say, oh, I'm giving him a goal incentive, when in fact it's simply a bribe, and we just have to be careful with that.
Right. The goal incentives, as you said, is for skills, from learning how to swim to learning their multiplication tables, just something that comes in learning a skill and not behavior.
And a lot of it can just be transferred by our verbal communication. We can switch from a bribe to a reward just by the way we couch our words or say our words. So we have to be very careful how we put it in terms of our words.
That's real good. That only underscores the fact that parents have to be thinking. We have to consider all of the elements of biblical discipline. Goal incentives, rewards, they're all very important. But we have to look at the other side. Talk about rewards, probably the one that's most neglected is this issue of affirmation, verbal affirmation. I mean, that's something that we just don't do. I mean, it's part of the encouragement process that we talked about in this session.
Encouraging words can go a long way. A high five or a big thumbs up when they've done a great job can go a long way in encouraging your kids.
I could see your children, your sons especially, even now as we're talking about this, sometimes, because they travel with us and we're together a lot, and sometimes I would have finished maybe talking to someone, and in the crowd, I see your sons going, Mr. Ezzo. But that is encouraging to me, but they learned it from you guys. It's a tremendous encouragement to them. That's super.
Yeah. They are interesting little fellows. Well, there's a lot, again, that's been covered tonight, and much for you to review this week at home. We really want you to take the time to go through the lesson and read it so that you're assimilating this and it becomes part of your thinking. And then next week, you'll finish up the discipline chart, and I believe that then your facilitator will be giving you a little quiz to see how well you have learned this whole process and filling in the blanks of a chart on your own. But until then, have a great week, and we'll see you here next week.